Welcome to the Vine Resources podcast show. Welcome to another edition of the Vine Resources podcast show. Today I'm delighted to have with us Ruben Timmerman. Ruben is the founder of Springest in Amsterdam. Ruben, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me, David.
Ruben, I know it's a very important week for you, being your 10th anniversary. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. Not sure if it's important, but it's a marker.
It's certainly a big milestone, and congratulations to you and the rest of the team. I think any business that makes out of the first 2 years of a business and coming through the challenges of recessions is fabulous testament to your team. Ruben, can you give us a little bit of an introduction for our listeners about yourself and the company, please?
Yeah, so I'll start with me. I'm the founder of Springest. I'm 38 years old. I founded the company when I was 28. At the same time, I got a daughter, so my daughter is almost the same age. Springest is both a learning marketplace and a learning platform for organizations. So we run our learning marketplace in the Netherlands, Germany, the UK, Belgium, and soon France as well. And you can find anything you can learn from on the marketplace. So that's of course instructor-led training, coaches, e-learning, video, e-books, basically everything you can learn from. And in the learning platform we have sort of the same marketplace, but then also the functionality of a learning management system. So large organizations like ING and the Dutch Postal Service and Siemens, they use our platform internally to help their employees develop themselves in a more self-directed learning way. So those are the two things we do with about 55 Springeteers, as we call them.
Fantastic. And that's, as you said, both your online technology platform as well as offline in the real world training. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. But we don't provide training ourselves. We just merely provide the support for finding the right training product, reviewing it, buying it. So we also do the financial structure behind it, so invoicing and payment flows from about 10,000 education providers towards their customers.
And could that be working with a small B2B business right up to a large scale corporate? What's your sort of customer base?
Yeah, but our learning platform is catered towards organizations of about 1,000 employees at least, because then it really starts to make sense to have your own white label platform and your own course catalog and your own procurement contracts and stuff like that. And below, 500 at least, but normally 1,000. You tend to use our public marketplace. So you go to springest.nl or springest.de or whatever, and you just use that to find your training or your e-learning and buy it there, so to say.
Fantastic. Ruben, what does a typical day in the business look like for you as the founder?
Well, as founders tend to do, they start early. So I usually get up at about 6:30. Not even that early, but I usually start with not working right away. So I usually start with meditating, and then if I have the time, a bit of yoga, maybe a bit of exercise, and then I tend to get in half an hour of work. I try to do one task that is sort of interesting to me, something I really want to do, and not to dive into my inbox right away. I don't always have the discipline though, so sometimes an inbox is there, and then you try to do that. And then I wake up my daughter, who I care for a large part of the week. And then, we have breakfast, bring her to school, and then I go off to work, sometimes with even a little swim in between 2 or 3 times a week. So then work is a lot of meetings. I really focus on people a lot, so I have quarterly meetings with every employee still, so those kind of meetings. And also tactical meetings that are sort of weekly updates in holacracy. Getting a bit ahead of myself there, but that's how we operate Springest. So that's also a big portion of my day. And the rest of it is very much online in Slack and Asana, our 2 main tools, where I write a lot, give feedback a lot, ask things from people in several teams, stuff like that. I think that sort of sums it up.
Fantastic. Very varied, lots going on, of course. And I'm always interested to know from the people that we interview who perhaps has had an impact on you as a leader, and even if it was a mentor to you. but really why this person's impacted your life so far. I wonder if you could share that with us.
Yeah. Well, I don't have someone like, Richard Branson or something like that. Although I, of course, read, biographies and listen to podcasts a lot. Like someone like Tim Ferriss interviews so many nice and interesting people, but I don't have one that would sort of jump out, except for my dad, who passed away last year. But he was always a mentor for me, not so much on the business side itself, sort of saying, do this or that, or don't forget about this. But he had one concern, which was, are you getting the most out of your own potential, Ruben? To, put all your potential out there as something positive, something energetic. And that's something he reminded me of every now and then. We talked about that. And that was always under our conversations when I would, update him about how the business was going. And he actually worked with Springest as well in the beginning for a year or something. 2 years after we were founded. So I hired him, actually. That was a funny thing. And that had the most impact on me, actually, to always want to get the most out of it. And that turned into my sort of personal purpose, but also into the purpose of Springest, which is helping everybody reach their full potential through learning and vitality, the two sort of business lines that we have. And that had the most impact, and that also grounds me a lot, It's not always about the numbers, about the revenue, or about the profit or whatever. As long as you feel that you're getting the most out of yourself and your colleagues, of course, that's what helps me the most.
Employee engagement is obviously very important to the success of the business. You've obviously done a lot of things around this in your organisation. Can you share with us what you've done around employee engagement from the top, and how really you keep, your team engaged?
Yeah. Let's start with that. We don't really have the top in classical terms. So I can call myself the founder, and let's say technically I am the CEO from the outside, but we employ or we use holacracy, a system for self-organization. That is still very hierarchical, but the hierarchy is not made up of people, it's made up of the work. So in our case, of roles and circles, as we call our teams, that each have a purpose, and they align within that hierarchy, but the hierarchy is not, I am David's boss or something. And this is what it all starts with. So that makes people very aware of their influence, and they also have a lot of influence, a lot of autonomy actually, but they're all also very aligned with the purpose and the metrics and the OKRs, the objectives and key results that we have. So people are very engaged because of this system and because of the freedom it allows them. Another thing we do very much is ask for feedback. So we use tiny polls to gather feedback from employees anonymously, and also non-anonymously if they want to. I ask people for feedback all the time. So we have quarterly talks, and then I always end with, do you have some feedback for me? And do you have it now? And if you don't, please give it to me later. Anything, you'd like to see me do more of or less of, or things that were that stuck in your head, something I did, anything. And that just to keep asking that helps people to think in those ways about me as well, because of course I give them a lot of feedback, but this also triggers them. And I get a lot of feedback actually. It's not always immediate. If you ask someone, tell me what you think of me, that doesn't work very well. But if you are open to that and you keep asking, then they will come up with stuff. So that's one way we do that.
Thanks for sharing that, by the way. It's great to hear so many different things that you're doing there. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing today's business leaders?
I think it is this openness as well. We propagate self-directed learning and self-management because, frankly, it's the only way to keep people engaged. If they don't have an impact on the business, they will feel frustrated, they will walk away, or even worse, they will stay and feel frustrated. That's what all these employee engagement surveys keep pointing out. So you have to give them some more room, more influence. You also have to give them transparency, because you can't tell people to make decisions, but then not, give them data to base the decisions on. So, for instance, at Springest, we have all our numbers are open, so everybody can see what every team is doing, literally up to how much money we have in the bank, because that can influence their decisions. So as a leader, it's, of course, a balancing act. How much do you share, and how do you keep some form of control and some insight and some direction as to where you're going. How do you keep aligning everybody? I think that's the biggest thing that leaders are sort of facing, because they all feel this need for engagement and more autonomy. But then, you don't want to just tell people, okay, you decide what to do. That's not enough. And that's why we actually chose holacracy, because it is a very strict system with a lot of rules. But within the rules, people are really free to choose and free to express their purpose, etc. And I think that's very hard for companies to now figure out, because if they don't make the move, people will be, frustrated. But if they do, they tend to sort of give people so much freedom that there's chaos and a lack of direction and clarity, and that also frustrates people. And that's very tricky to navigate.
Ruben, whether it was in your own company or previously, what's the best piece of business advice you've ever received?
Yeah, also not one where I can say it's this, but the book I loved was The Hard Thing About Hard Things from Ben, and now I forgot his name, Ben Horowitz from Andreessen Horowitz fame now, the biggest or one of the bigger venture capital funds. And that book is just like, if you read it as a founder, like every 5 minutes you'll feel like, oh man, I have to do more of that, hire faster, fire faster, follow your gut, really tough things that are hard for leaders. So you could put that whole book in there. It's just full of good business advice. But in general, I think, and most founders I think will recognize this, is act faster on your gut or your ratio actually. You usually already know days, weeks or hours before you actually act. And usually it's a matter of just acting faster. And then maybe you're wrong in 5 to 10% of those cases, and waiting longer will give you a bit more data and make a bit better decision. But in most cases, waiting is a bad idea. So act faster, I would say.
Ruben, I'm gonna use that for my next call, because I've thought of a few things that I need to act a little bit quicker for. So thanks for that reminder there. How do you help a new employee understand the culture when they first come into the organization?
Yeah, it starts with this, David. I'm now doing this podcast. People interested in working for Springest might hear this, and that's a very important thing, to be open about how we operate. And we have a recruitment site, of course, called join.springest.com, where we share some stories and quotes and how we work, and not just the benefits, but also really how we work. We even have all the roles that people have on roles.springest.com, so people can see what other people do here, and they can reflect for themselves on that and think, where do I want to go in Springest? What can you do here? So a lot of the culture is outside of the company, or visible outside of the company. And we also do safaris, so people can literally join Springest for a few hours, join a meeting and get introduced on how we work also, before you actually start working here. And then when you are in the hiring process, you get to do a trial, usually 1 to 2 days of working within your actual role with access to all the systems that you would have, or almost. There's an NDA to be signed and you cannot access everything, but you actually work as if you are already working here before we hire you, and only 1 in 3 people get hired from those trial days. So there's a lot of stuff before you get hired, and then of course when you're hired, there's an extensive onboarding project that you run yourself, that you also have to update your new colleagues on, so you immediately get put in sort of the driver's seat. And then of course we have a ton of internal training and workshops with people from all teams actually. So even if you're a bit further away from a specific team, let's say you are in customer service, or as we call them, learning advisors, you also get onboarded into the product circle by someone in that team, so that you also understand what they are doing, why they are important. And that's all very sort of instrumental to understanding the whole company and why we're there, and then also why we do things the way we do them. I think those are some examples, but there's quite a lot of it. It's, I think, the main thing I can do as a leader, actually, to guard this culture and invest in that. And that's also why, what I already mentioned, I have quarterly talks with everybody, and I plan on sort of keep on doing that until I literally can't, because we have too many employees, and then I'll figure out something else, do it every half year or maybe less than an hour or something. I think that's the main thing I can do.
Fantastic. What's the one mistake that, Ruben, you've witnessed leaders making more frequently than others?
I think I was thinking about this up front, and I think it's doing everything themselves. Because as a leader, especially if you are a founder, you start at the company, so you are naturally sort of the best at everything. Of course, you're not, but that's what you think. And in many ways, you are the best because you have this extra founder bonus. For instance, the founder is always the best salesperson, unless he's really or she is a developer or something. But usually, you are the best one to sell people on the vision. But you have to stop doing things yourself as soon as you can, and let other people do it, even though, or even if they are not as good at it as you are, because otherwise they won't learn. So keeping things to yourself and keeping sort of involved in everything, that's what founders typically do. And I'm definitely not not the exception to that rule, because I know a lot of stuff. I want stuff to be done correctly and in the best way possible. But you have to keep reminding yourself to not do that. Get out of the way, even though the short-term result might be a bit worse than if you would be involved, but just don't. That's the advice I can give.
How do you see the industry, particularly your industry, but how do you see it changing over the next few years, particularly around your learning and also perhaps also the technology platforms? And how do you see that changing, and how will that also affect your ability to attract the right talent for your organization?
Yeah, we're obviously in two industries. In the learning industry, which is changing pretty slowly, actually. And then in the internet startup tech space, that changes pretty fast. So that's very challenging because we're competing with, let's say, Booking.com, who have their headquarters in Amsterdam, and Uber, who have a big office here, and companies like that. So we're hiring against them when we fight for developers, for instance. Yeah. And that stuff, but we have our quirks like the self-management and the way we operate, and that's also why we have that strong culture, why we try to communicate that a lot to the outside. To say, there are different ways of doing business, and this is something every business has to deal with, and we're on the forefront of it, and that gives us an edge in hiring and attracting talent. And with regards to the learning industry, that is just changing to self-direction, and that's changing to less management. Let's say in Europe, it's very common for companies to give people a personal learning budget that they can spend freely or semi-freely, with approval from a manager, maybe, but you are in charge and you choose what you want to learn. And even if it's not, perfectly in your current career path, companies tend to gravitate towards, okay, if it's good for you and let's say business related, then it's probably good for the company as well, even though there's no immediate impact. You're in sales and you're not doing a sales training, but you're probably learning something about the industry or about product that helps you develop as a person. And that's, of course, where we're also in, and we try to help both our 10,000 education providers and the organization on the other side who are buying the learning to navigate that. But it's interesting to see that the supply in learning is changing faster than the demand. So there are a lot of e-learning platforms and new tools and cool ways to learn. But on the buying side, they're having a hard time navigate all of that because procurement departments of bigger companies are not made to buy from a lot of smaller companies and then from a new one next week and another one next month. So trying to navigate that is a tricky one. But that's luckily our business, so I think we're in the right spot.
Well done. What if you had your time again and were given your 20-year-old self advice? Looking back now, what's the one thing that you tell yourself?
Oh man, this 20-year-old me, huh? Let's start with don't listen to your mom too much. She was always very worried, where my dad would be more like, yeah, you'll figure it out and just, make the most of it, stuff like that. And my mom was more the worrying type who would say, you should still finish your university degree, stuff like that. And actually I made the move when I was 22 or 23 to stop studying. So I never finished my my master's degree. Not even my bachelor's, actually. I was sort of doing them at the same time. And I quit both, which I think is funny for someone, founding a learning platform to say I quit learning in that way. But that actually enabled me to start learning faster in other ways. And I founded, or I actually already had a business on the side then, or sort of an internet agency where we would give search engine optimization advice and user experience advice. And to really choose the thing that challenges you the most and that learns or that teaches you the most. And that is very often not the thing that your mom wants. So if they conflict, then choose the one that's most challenging, so you learn faster. Because every day that you delay learning will hurt you sort of exponentially later, because the learning tends to compound like interest rates. So if you start later, the damage gets bigger very quickly. So yeah, quit studying. That's one thing I can say.
What, Ruben? By the way, what's the plans for Friday for your celebration?
Yeah, we have our anniversary, 10-year anniversary. So we have a Springfest, as we call it, every year. And this time it's a bit bigger. I think there will be about 180 to 200 guests in our own office. So we sort of clean out the office. We have a pretty big space in the middle of Amsterdam. And there will be DJs. We have them booked until 4, I think. So that's sort of the... and then, after 4, usually it goes on until 6. So it's just a big party, actually, where people can invite their friends and family. And my mom is coming, stuff like that. So we really wanted to be inclusive for all the employees and their friends, actually. So a big party.
That's really nice of you, and that's great to hear. Ruben, thank you so much for sharing so much with us today. And I took a lot away from that conversation as well. What's the best way for people to reach out for you, to get in touch with the company, to find out more?
Yeah, you can check out ruben.org. That's my personal site. I don't really like LinkedIn because they are messaging so much, but you can find me on LinkedIn. And on Twitter, it's my username is Rubzie, Rubzie. Those are the best ways.
Fantastic. Ruben, appreciate your time and enjoy your celebrations on Friday.
Happy to do it, David. Thank you very much.